very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really an amazing convention. I mean, there's so many people. It's wonderful. It's, you know, I keep thinking that Star Trek is over, you know. That I have to get on with the rest of my life because it's no longer, you know.
You belong to us.
It's okay. It's great. But yeah, there it goes again, you know, Star Trek. So I'm tickled that I was invited to come here, and I'm very pleased to engage with you. And the way I generally do this is I just ask questions, and any questions you have that I can answer, that my memory hasn't lost the answers to, I will be happy to do so. Yes.
Who did you enjoy playing more, Chekhov or Becker?
Yes.
I never did enjoy playing Becker. Bester, however, was.
I was close.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, you might be surprised.
Hey, on your food delivery here.
Okay, over now. 10-4. Whatever the hell I say. I really enjoyed playing Alfred Bester. It was a challenge. It was much more of a challenge for me than what I was given on Star Trek. I'll always be in the debt of Gene Roddenberry and all those folks for making it possible for me to have a career. But in terms of the aesthetic reward, the sense of accomplishment, and any other positive feelings that I harbor, I think Babylon 5 was really a wonderful experience for me. I just truly enjoyed it. You know, the scripts were terrific. The role was always pivotal to the action. The cast was great. Everybody got along really well. Everybody got along. Now, you can read between the lines, but it was a terrific experience. Somebody else. Yes, over there.
I saw an interview a long time ago that how you felt about when the next generation started. You weren't too happy about it.
No, I was definitely approaching it with a very shallow, mean-spirited attitude, hoping that it would not succeed. That's just immaturity. And when I heard that they were reprising thematic material that was very familiar, you know, that had been borrowed from some of our episodes, I was sort of, you know, feeling, oh, good, you know, they don't have their own, their own original perception of this. And very quickly that changed, obviously, and the show took on its very distinct character and quite fascinating. I think we were two different kinds of shows. You know, ours was a very visceral show, and theirs was far more an intellectual show, or cerebral show. And there certainly was room for both of them. But yeah, that was my initial reaction. But I am certainly capable of harboring petty feelings. You know. But at least ultimately, I have the grace to admit when something was good. And I found that Next Generation was a very good show. Yeah.
How did you feel about the Star Trek reboot movie then?
That's an interesting question. I didn't know what to think when I went in. I knew that it was going to be good. I visited on the set. I saw J.J. Abrams in action, and I knew it was going to be good. But I was wondering how I was going to react to it, knowing that puerile side of me. And I must say, patting myself on the back in the process, that I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a terrific movie. It was great fun. I thought all the actors did extremely well. I thought Anton Yeltsin, you know, was an absolutely charming young man and delightful to watch. His moment with the letter V and W was hysterical.
Say nuclear whistles.
So, but I was able to watch it totally detached, which is remarkable. I was able to watch it just as a film goer, as a member of the audience, and not make comparisons, and not say, well, I would have done it differently, or Leonard would have done something differently, or DeForest would have done, and not have to choose sides. I was watching different faces, playing characters in a different story, and I just was able, as I say, to relax and just have a really, really good time. So I'm pleased that the people who are in charge now will have the reins for at least another couple of films, because I think they've done great justice to it. If we're talking about profound emotional moments, something that you carry away more than the kinesthetic, physical kind of excitement that was so much a part of this new Star Trek movie. But if we're talking about something other than that, then I think there are a couple of Star Trek films that we made that have those kind of very memorable moments that stay with you, that you can identify with, and I think more, as I say, in a more profound way. I think Star Trek II with Khan, there'll never be a villain, I don't think, as extraordinary as Ricardo Montalban. He was a wonderful guy, and he was, was he over the top? I don't care. I bought it. I totally bought it, and I thought it was just a wonderful contrast to Captain Kirk. I mean, his anguish and his pain. He was a villain, but he had human feelings, and you cannot help but relate to his pain. That he had lost his woman. He had been sent away. He'd been isolated from the rest of the world and the rest of the universe. So I thought that was and of course the death of Spock in that film was wonderfully done. It's just magical. And I think that stands up to anything. And perhaps those two moments will stand up to anything in any Star Trek movie. Of course, who knows how many more I'm going to get to see. But I think they were great. And of course, I thoroughly enjoyed The Voyage Home for obvious reasons. Chekhov had so much more to do. It was just a delight being part of that whole thing. But it's a different kind of filmmaking. It truly is. You watch those movies and you get a sense of the pace of Star Trek II and Star Trek IV, and I'm using them because I think they represent the best that we were able to do. And if you compare them to J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, and it's a whole different kind of filmmaking. The scenes are 8-9 seconds long. The edits are are the blink of an eye, and they're onto something else. Constantly moving, constantly full of action. And at the same time, giving us a sense of who the characters are and what the relationships are. I don't know where else I was taking that. Yes, in the corner.
I never thought I'd have this opportunity my entire life to be in a room with you or anybody from this organization. So thank you so much. It's been a really unexpected thrill. And I wanted to share with you something that's been in my mind since I was in public school. They were going to cancel the TV showing of Star Trek. And the Star had run this article, and it was so important because, I come home from school, and school's not so great. Home like this is so great, and TV is really, really important. And your show is so important. And it said that they were going to cancel the show if people didn't write in for the Star. And they later on said there was such an overwhelming response that they convinced the TV stations to carry the show still. And they said that they thought if they got at least 1,000 responses, they would consider continuing the show. They got over 100,000. And I wrote in 12,000. Thank you.
That's great.
I wanted you to know that, and it was just my little secret. His name, my mom's name. And I'm proud of that.
Absolutely. As you should be. As you should be. Yes.
Speaking of Bester, did you ever read anything by the author Alfred Bester?
No, I am embarrassed to admit that I haven't. In fact, I was given 2 books after the fact, after the show was already off the air. And I do have them at home, and at some point I'll get to them, I suppose. But a little known fact, a little known trivia fact, that Alfred Bester's wife was the first Lois Lane on Superman on the radio.
Cool.
Yeah, so there. Now you know something like that. Yes.
Had you ever been considered to be on the Next Generation, like some of the other original series cast members had?
Did I consider it?
Or were you asked, or had you?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I did in fact meet with one of the writers because they said they would like to get us have a story where I could come on. The one they did with Jimmy Doohan was enormously successful, and so I went to lunch with not Moore, the other guy. I can't remember his name. And we talked about trying to come up with a story idea, and then we left it at that we'd come back and talk about it again. And then they got a hold of me and they said, come in, we'll have a meeting with all the writing staff. And we're kicking around ideas, and suddenly Berman called and said he had an emergency meeting. And everybody had to leave. Now, I am paranoid, but at this particular moment, I truly believe there was an emergency meeting, and they all rushed out of the room. And that was whatever momentum we had towards finding that story was lost at that time. I did come up with an idea finally, one that would have worked. That was because there was 2 caveats. Couldn't be time travel, and it couldn't be the son of, or the grandson of, or great-grandson of. And I finally came up with an idea when I learned that, what was that Klingon's name? Isn't that terrible?
Worf?
Worf.
Yeah.
Worf had lived with a couple of old Russian folks when he was a child.
Yes, his wife.
And I tied that in to a disease on the ship where it attacked Worf and he began hallucinating. And he was hallucinating, and that was the doorway to bring Chekhov into the show. As a hallucination, as somebody who was after him. You know? But nobody else could see him, because he wasn't there, except for Worf. Well, Worf and everybody watching television. It certainly got around the 2 prohibitions that were set down, but never got in again to tell that story. Yeah.
It's more common now, especially among the recent Star Trek shows, for actors from the show to step behind the camera and direct. What was it like when Star Trek 3 came along and Leonard Nimoy decided he wanted to direct? What was that like all of a sudden when your co-stars is telling you where to stand and where to go?
Right. Well, I think we were a little bit uncomfortable with the idea in advance, only because Leonard was Spock, 24 hours a day. Come on the set and say, "Hi, Leonard, how are you?" So I don't know what, was he going to be able to, communicate? Is he going to be able to certainly he was articulate, but would be able to make a kind of personal, personal contact with us. And as it turned out, it was totally, there was no concern whatsoever. He was just so you understood how he operated. He directed by omission. And what I mean by that is, if he didn't say anything, it was fine. Once you understood that no comment was a good comment, you were fine. It's only when something he didn't like would he step forward and say something. I do remember, and I won't tell you the name of the actor, and it wasn't me. We were asleep in front of the building where his body was being held. You remember that scene where everybody was outside the building and we woke up in the morning? I don't know how better to describe it. I can see there's a lot of blank faces. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, on Vulcan.
But we were waking up, and the camera was catching us waking up, and And one of the actors went, and of course he was furious because that's so trite, and that's, you know, it's not an organic gesture. It's something that you do to say, to spell out, look, I'm waking up. So he went over to the actor, and first he said, cut! And he went over and said, don't do that again. But, oh, I do, well, see, this is probably going to fall on deaf ears because you're all probably too young to remember who I'm talking about here. Like, more and more I find that anybody under 40 has no idea who I am or what I have done. But we were doing Star Trek 4, and we were working on the Bird of Prey, and it was the middle of summer. It was beastly hot. It was just terrible. There was very little oxygen to pass around, and we were finally getting to the end of the shoot on that set. We were all looking forward to it with great enthusiasm and anticipation, and we only had one scene more to do. And I must say immediately that in Star Trek 4, when we were in those chairs, we had motors under those chairs, so they vibrated, as opposed to, you know, everybody. We were hit by something in space. 1, 2, 3, right, left. You know, we actually had motors that, you know, made us shake. So, and there must have been 150 people on the set. We had a huge crane. We had all sorts of equipment. Everybody was dying to get out of there. And then finally, Leonard says, "All right, that's a wrap." I said, "Oh, Leonard, please. I got an idea. Oh, God, what an idea." He says, "Okay, quiet. And went through the ranks. Quiet. And everybody came to a dead stop. It was magnificent. It was just like, they're all staring at me. And I said, "Turn on the motor under my chair." And they turned on the motor, and I said, "I've always loved Spencer Tracy." You've never seen a pissed folk in your face. Another question.
William Shatner released 3, Leonard Nimoy wrote 2, Nichelle Nichols wrote 1, and George Takei as well. When are you releasing your autobiography?
Oh, I did?
You did?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think it's the best one. I think without question it's the funniest, you know. It's called Warp Factors, an Erotic's Guide to the Universe. And you can get it on Amazon. And it's a lot cheaper now than it was when it came out. Yeah, it actually got quite well reviewed, critically reviewed. I'm proud of the work. I think it was a good piece of writing. Yeah?
What work did you do to get the accent for Chekhov perfect? Did you
What?
base it on somebody, or?
Well, see, now, you bring up a whole other point. The accent of Chekhov perfect. Boy, there are a lot of bloggers out there who all have a dozen Russian friends, and none of them speaks with that accent. You know, I've been told that ad infinitum, ad nauseum, ad absurdum, on and on. You know, there is no W in the Russian language, therefore you never would have said Wessels instead of Vessels. Well, the fact of the matter is my father was Russian, and that's the way he spoke. And I either buy it or you don't, but that's the way he spoke. What I did additionally is I got a book. Of course, I heard my father's accent in my ear, but I also got a book on dialects, which I used on several occasions. I did French on television, I did a little Swedish on television, for those of you who have ever seen the Gidget that I did. I've done German on television. So, yeah, I used the book. And nobody ever said, don't do it that way. So I just kept doing it. When I was a little kid, I was about 11 years old, I went out to Hollywood for the first time with my father. And I think we went by train. And he had a friend who was a famous character actor in Hollywood at the time. named Akim Tamirov. Akim Tamirov did lots of movies. He had a very thick Russian accent, but whenever the role called for accent, they chose him. So he did a lot of Mexicans with Russian accents. But I remember meeting him, and he was a character man. He had a pot belly, and he had large, jangling jowls, and a very bulbous nose and bushy eyebrows. And he came up to me and he took my cheek between his fingers and said, "You look just like me when I was a little boy." Something to look forward to. Go on. Yes?
When going to see a movie, what's your favorite genre?
Well, I'm kind of wimpy that way, I like a good love story, and I can be very touched by a good love story, and I like really good comedies. There aren't all that many. Occasionally you find one, something that touches me, that digs deep and makes me feel something. Those are the kind of pictures that I think I enjoy most. If you ask me offhand, what have I seen lately that made me feel that way? It's pretty terrible with titles. I mean, the independent film Juno. I thought that was an extremely touching movie. I mean, I guess it's a girlies movie or something, but it's the kind of film that gets me. Human relationship stories where people care about each other, where they're hurt, where they deal with pain, and ultimately find a way through the nobility of humanity, of being a human being, of overcoming their distress. Now those are the kind of things. I mean, that isn't to say that there aren't a couple of horror movies that I saw. The Japanese versions and the American versions of the Japanese versions of a couple of films. The one with the little kid rises out of the well, and crawls through your television set. That was pretty spooky. So I guess in every genre there are pictures that I like. I mean, I almost rather tell you the names of the movies that I like, and you can find the categories for yourself. Of course, I'm from another era, so the movies that I like are 30, 40 years in the past. But Brando and On the Waterfront, Brando and Streetcar Named Desire, James Dean and East of Eden. There are films that will forever stay with me because they were so poignant and because the performances were so superb. Yeah.
I apologize. Oh, sorry.
No, it was you.
Oh.
I really can't tell. I can't see that far. So.
I apologize if this is a stupid question, but I was really curious to know. I mean, there was a Cold War, United States and Russia. You're playing a Russian character. We all know some people watch television, can't differentiate between reality and fiction, because I was all here tonight. I was wondering if you had gotten hate mail, or if there's some people that were really torn by the fact that there was a Cold War going on, and here you are playing a Russian on the Star Trek TV show. Were you getting hate mail or getting people saying, "Oh, he's a Russian guy on the Star Trek"?
No, I didn't. There's two reasons for that. One, most of my audience, people who wrote mail, were writing in pencil and on longhand. They were kids, 8 to 14 years old. I was brought on the show to appeal to the younger set, and they weren't terribly interested in the Cold War. And second, the character himself was not a threat, was not a danger, and it didn't represent a Russian that you might take exception to, that you might have some umbrage with. He was very young, and he even when he was chauvinistic and talked about Russians inventing this and Russians that, it was more like a comic turn than anything else. So I did not receive that kind of mail. No. All the way in the back.
Hey, so you said it was one way working with Leonard Nimoy, but how was it on Star Trek 5.
No, actually, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all. I anticipated it being terrible. Really. If I was a little concerned about Leonard on 3, I was a whole lot concerned about working with Bill. Bill went into the film saying that he wanted to get back to the series days and work with the triumvirate, the 3 main characters, and keep the story about them. I mean, that's in print. So with all of that. And the fact that we all, all of the supporting actors had some problem with him going in. It certainly was a very, anxiety-ridden beginning to the movie, to the shoot, at least for me. And as I learned subsequently, I didn't know how badly George felt. I knew how badly Jimmy felt about him, how angry he was with him. I didn't know that George felt that way. Because we didn't share, which was a shame. We could have, if we had shared, we might have been able to do something. Going as a group to the powers that be. But anyway, so I came on the set expecting the worst, and I don't know, the first day on the set I have a line, one of those lines that live forever, aye aye sir, and Bill went, cut, whoa, that was wonderful. That's the way it was for the 8 days that I was on the shoot. Everything was wonderful, and everything was as challenging as my first line. So it got to be the last day. I went to be the last day, and I turned. We were sitting on the bridge, and I said to George, today's my last day. And he says, oh. Well, we must tell Bill. And I said, no, don't tell Bill. Don't tell Bill. He says, oh, Bill. Today is Walter's last day. Somebody who hasn't raised their hand. Over there, yes.
What did you do to prepare for the role of Esther?
The parts that I've played best, that I've been most successful with, are those that require the least amount of cerebration, least amount of analysis, because I understand them intuitively. I mean, I think the best acting comes from the person. You don't detach from a role. You don't detach from yourself to play a character. My feeling is that you take from yourself and invest it in the character. In order to make it most truthful, it has to come originally from you. And with both Chekhov, who, as I say, wasn't that challenging, and with Bester, who was a bit more challenging, I was able to find the elements to play that were part of who I was. Not necessarily those elements of character that I show to the world. As we all do, there are things that we, through the process of socialization, we learn to inhibit and we learn to process in a different way so it isn't antisocial. But the actor has this wonderful license to find out just how much of a shit he is, and bring that to the character if it's necessary. And that's what I found myself doing. The part was really well written and gave me opportunities to explore these character elements. And so I didn't have to do a great. I wish I could tell you that I went to an institution where telepaths live, and I rode in cars with them, and I didn't do any of that. I just let it come from who I was. The interesting challenge was when they kept adding layers to Bester, and I had to find a way of justifying in the performance and in my own thinking how these words could come from the same words from the same character that I was playing 4 weeks ago. So it made it behooved me to find these layers in the character that were not contradictory, that you could exist, or if they were contradictory, they nevertheless could exist in the same personality. And so that's the kind of work I did. How can he feel in love now and pine for this woman, and at the same time have been such a bad guy and and talked about the destruction of the Earthers, whatever the hell we call them, mundanes, 4 episodes before. But then, we're all full of complexities like that. We're all full of contradictory feelings. And it's just the idea of grasping it as a whole. In psychology, there's a term called gestalt, where you see the whole thing as opposed to, elements. And when you can see the whole character and that he's capable of behaving like this on one occasion and like that on another occasion, and still be the same person, then you can feel comfortable with what appears to be character elements that are contradictory to each other. So I know how to explain it. Yeah.
I have a question about the Futurama episode that you did.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say I really enjoyed your performance in that. And I wanted to know if you had a lot of lines in that episode. Was that all in the script, or did you suggest any of that?
I might have suggested one line or two. But the funniest line, like, say nuclear vessels, and I say, no! that was written, I mean, these guys had been to conventions, They had a sense of, who we were, I guess. Yeah, I thought it was delightful. It was really clever. I really enjoyed that episode. Yeah.
Star Trek being as revolutionary as it really was, the original series, what was it like reading that script for the first time?
What was it like?
Reading the script for the first time, going into that.
I'm going to be destroying illusions here. I know that. Even though I was not as young as I was supposed to be on the show, I'm still pretty young. I mean, I've always embraced, humanitarian causes and a liberal point of view, and voted for the people who I thought would best represent my feelings, and even marched a couple of times, not a lot, but once in a while. When I was cast on the show, I was less concerned with what messages were being written and spoken as I was about working, and working steadily at a job. So each week, at the end of the previous episode, I waited and find out whether I'd be in the next one. I was really, really concerned about survival and making some advancement in my career. It was only later, when I was able to, get some distance from it and began to understand, the commentary of this, and the topicality of the issues that were raised, that I begin to feel a certain pride in my association with a show that said so many things that I believed in. But initially, I was really just about the work and about the salary, and hoping that I would get enough exposure that it would, advance my career. See, I told you I'm not disillusioned. Yeah.
The role of Bester really showed me that you were a really great actor, and I love Chekhov. He was great. He was Starfleet. Bester showed me that you really, it came out in your acting that you were awesome, and it was and I just couldn't see myself different. I couldn't believe it was the same guy. I thought, this is amazing. And so I thank you for that. And what's next?
What's next, indeed? I really don't know. I wrote and helped produce a feature film that's going to be playing tonight called Inalienable. We have made a deal with a very prestigious distribution company, a DVD distribution company called Anchor Bay. In fact, if you stop by my table, you can see the cover art for the DVD. It's going to be released in November. That is the most concrete project that I can speak of, and even that is a couple of years old. I am working on the real origins of vampires, from my point of view. I suspect it's going to be a huge opus because it's in 3 acts and it's 3 separate periods in history and how vampires evolved and what happened and how they ultimately came to be part of. I don't want to go into it. But it's a challenging piece for me. I'm writing it as a screenplay, but I'm also writing it with a novel in mind. If in fact it should turn out to be something that worthy. You know, I've been offered a bunch of little movies, independent movies, over the internet by folks I've never met. Well, that's okay. And even when the money is scarce or non-existent, I have, at least read some screenplays to see whether just working in a good piece of storytelling might be enough for me to climb on board. But with 2 exceptions, the stuff that I've read is just dreadful. Just dreadful. I mean, story, initially I was told that the part I was going to play was about a very conflicted priest who was dealing with his religion. And I thought, wow, that could be interesting. Yeah, it's a conflicted priest who's dealing with his religion in a horror movie where the evil god is cutting off the fingers of babies. Yeah. That was my feeling. So I've passed on a bunch of stories like that. It's not my ethics, it's not my morality, and it's not my generation. Maybe you can rationalize working on something like that and sleep peacefully at night. I can't. Yes.
Talking about Star Trek 3 and 5 earlier, my question is more about Star Trek 6, just as a kind of an end to that. You were talking earlier about looking at something not from its elements, but more as a whole, not necessarily the character's perspective, but what was your sentiment of the atmosphere in that final piece of storytelling of that generation, that group of characters coming together?
Well, the last part of that question is different than the rest of it. I thought it was a very well told story. I thought it had, it was a mystery and it held up very well. I think the acting was commanding. I think everybody did a bang-up job. But I was, as I mentioned, I was enormously disappointed in how they dealt with the supporting characters. That was to be the last of our films. And I thought, with Nick Meyer in charge of the writing, that really some acknowledgement would be made, and we would be able to tie some elements together and finally flesh out some of these characters, and that didn't happen. It didn't happen. The story was a terrific story, and it was well told, and everybody did well. And it would not necessarily have been better if they had gone the way I would have liked it to have gone. But I'm talking purely from a personal point of view. I would have liked to see Chekhov have a moment and Uhura have a moment. Something that was a signature moment that you could take away with you, instead of the fact that these characters that we played were for the most part movable furniture. I mean, that's the way I felt for most of the time. So Yeah, it was a good film. It was, I thought everything about it was great, except it was only the things that were absent that bothered me. Yes.
If the producers of the new Star Trek, the one that they're planning on for the sequel, if they called you and offered you a part, would you take it? And if so, would you like to come back as Chekhov?
Like, I don't know how they could bring me back as Chekhov. I mean, it'd have to be another time thing, and I don't think they would do that twice. And I don't think that's necessarily a good way to go. And I wouldn't come back if it was simply, for a camera op, for something just to say we have Walter Koenig in the film too, and there he is. If you look behind the guy, and, he's waving. I wouldn't come back in those circumstances. No. Yeah.
I thought I had read somewhere that the original cast wasn't like 100% happy with you showing up in the second season. Is that true, or did you notice anything?
Well, George says that he wasn't happy. And I'm not talking out of turn because he wrote about this in his book, the one that you did read. He said he was upset. He was doing Green Berets and they went overtime, and instead of coming back at the beginning of the season, he was left out. He wasn't available for the first 8 or 9 scripts, during which time they utilized my character more than they probably would have otherwise. So he said he came back and he was, in a tizzy, and he was angry and jealous and never saw it. Either he's a better actor than he gives himself credit for, or I'm just really, really stupid. So I never got that sense from him. He was always courteous and gentlemanly. But that's what he says anyway.
I have a very silly question about the first few episodes with Chekhov. The hair. Whose idea was that awful hair? And was it really your hair?
No, it wasn't my hair. It was a woman's wig, as a matter of fact. I went down to Max Factor with the makeup fellow, Fred Phillips. Ooh, I remembered it. We brought back this is for the audition, we brought back about 5 different wigs. A blonde wig and a red wig and a brunette. What else? And I tried them all on. And then after I tried them all on, all the executives tried them on. And I was thinking to myself, they've got to cast me because I got something on all these guys now. Yeah, and my hair was short. I had made my own film, so my hair was short. And they wanted to capture the feeling in the young audience that Davy Jones provoked in the audiences, in his audience. They were looking for somebody who would appeal to that segment, that demographic. We didn't use the term at the time. And so that's what that was about. And when my hair grew out after about 6 episodes, I stopped wearing the wig. Do have a kind of amusing story. I finally met Davy Jones about 3 weeks ago. And, yeah, he's a very pleasant fellow, very nice gentleman. We talked for about 10 minutes. I saw no resemblance whatsoever. But for years, people have been, as recently as a year ago, and after 40 years we're talking, this person, I was a very tall woman, and she was pregnant, and I was thinking to myself, boy, she's going to have tall kids, And she was looking at me, and she says, "You know what I'm thinking, don't you?" And I said, "Maybe." She says, "I'm thinking that you're Davy Jones, aren't you?" That wasn't what I was thinking. I did go to a dinner with a bunch of friends of mine about 15, 20 years ago, actors, and we were all sitting around eating, and a young girl came over to the table, and she was all giddy, and a little nervous, and she said, "Oh my God, are you who I think you are?" And I said, "Well, maybe." And noticing that all my actor friends are all, son of a bitch. And I said, she says, "Oh God, could you settle a bet with a girlfriend of mine? She's sitting over there." And I said, "All right, could you come over and say hello?" And I said, "Well, okay." And I said, I lift out of the chair, and she says, "Oh, and could you sing 'Hey, Hey, We're the Monkeys'?" So,
I was just wondering, when you were playing Bester, Deep Space Nine was out at the same time. Was there ever any weirdness or like fallout?
well, there was some question about who borrowed from whom. B5 had actually been around longer than Deep Space Nine. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, been around longer. Now, I've heard Joe pose the question. I've never heard him accuse anybody of anything, Joe being Joe Straczynski, the creator of B5. So, I don't know. It happens all the time, though. I went to Paramount. When Paramount had their own network, which was like for 2 seasons or something, I pitched them. I pitched the creative department an idea about a nightclub in space, and I had Jimmy Doohan. Part of my pitch was that Jimmy Doohan was the manager, George Takei was the maitre d', Michelle was the chanteuse, and I was the failed comic. It was just this pitch. It wasn't anything in writing. You're not supposed to, when you go in and tell a story, you're not supposed to put it in writing, because then it's much more, it's provable that they, took the idea. So I had no way of proving it. But, 6 months later, Paramount has a show about a nightclub in space. The difference is they use mostly black cast. But it was, not only was it the same concept, it was on the air. It was on the air for like a year and a half. But they brought Jimmy Doohan in to play a role in it. So things do get purloined. They do get stolen, and it's very hard to prove it. It's very hard. My friend Harlan Ellison, who is a famous science fiction writer, has spent a career suing Paramount and other entities over stories that were Demon with a Glass Hand. That became, I think, The Twilight Zone or one of those science fiction shows. An episode was taken from him, and he was compensated for it. That's not a terrifically positive note to end things on, and I know we need to go on. I'll tell you one last little story, just to leave it leave you with a smile. And again, for those of you who are not familiar with anything before CGI, this might get it. But when we were getting ready to do Star Trek VI, we didn't know who was in charge, what story we were going to do. Harv Bennett, who was our producer at the time, who had produced 2 through 5, was pushing to do a new story about the Academy days, with bringing in a new cast, not unlike what J.J. Abrams had done. But we didn't think we were done at that point, and we knew that there were people who wanted us to do one more film, and Harv Bennett, who had his own personal thing going. So we were calling each other, DeForest, Jimmy, George, and I were back and forth. What have you heard? What have you heard? And I had put a call into George, and he was out of the country. He was in France, as a matter of fact. And I left him and said, "George, when you get back, give me a call." Now, there should have been a bigger pause there, because it wasn't about that issue, about what the movie was about. It was about something entirely unrelated to that. And when he got back 10 days later, and he called me, he says, "Walt, what have you heard? What have you heard?" And I suddenly realized, that I wasn't calling about that. I said, "Oh, George, I've got some really bad news." He said, "Are you sitting down?" He says, "Yes, yes." I said, they're going to do Star Trek in claymation. There's this long pause, and I hear, oh my God. And then another long pause, and are they going to use our voices?